accent, I guess. And I didn't notice anything strange. But when I opened the door for her, she said, "Thank you, my love." And it was in a British accent. And I thought that was weird, but I didn't think anything of it. Just kind of shook it off. Once you get into the first door I passed in, there's another set of glass doors that you have to go in. So once she went into the first door that I let her in, she waited, and this lady never made eye contact with me, kept her head down the entire time. And she waited, and I opened up one of the glass doors for her to go into, and she went in. And I walk a little fast, so once she went in, I went in behind her, and then I kind of walked past her and got a little bit ahead of her. And as I was walking, I was thinking to myself that this woman was odd. Something was off, but it was late. I was ready to get home, so I didn't think much of it. Now, once you get into this building, this lobby that I was in, it's huge and it's very empty. There's a security desk, but it's all the way in the back, basically almost on the other side of the lobby and also farther in the back. It's very hard to describe, so I can't really describe it to you. But you can't see them. You really can't see the security desk. You have to actually walk farther to the back of the lobby and make a small, I guess a slight right or whatnot to actually see the booth. Other than that, it's a very open lobby. There's like a couple tables and chairs, but nothing really. It's really just almost a football-sized field lobby with nothing in it. And it's dead quiet. There's a fountain in it, but that's off at that time of night. So it was silent. Like, you could hear nothing. You could hear a pin drop in there. So as I was walking towards this back door that I have to, the one that I would exit out of to be at my garage, I heard a very loud shriek. And it scared me, and I jumped. And I turned, and I looked behind me, and this woman was pulling out a chair that's at one of the tables. And because the lobby is so empty and so big, it was very, very loud. I just turned around and I started walking as fast as I could out of the building. And probably about 5 steps in, I decided to look back, and this woman was gone. Completely gone. The chair was pushed back in like no one had ever pulled it out. And this lady was gone. And I actually looked. I stopped, turned around, took a few steps to my left and my right to look. This woman was gone. I don't know. I have no idea where she went. The only way back out was the doors that we came back in, and they make a very loud noise. So if I would have heard those open, also the front of the building is glass, so I would have seen her exit. I could see the outside. Like, I could see the doors that we came in. This woman was gone. So I just got to my car as fast as I could. I got in the car, I got out of my garage, I headed home. I didn't have no music. I kind of drove in silence, just trying to wonder what just happened. And I wasn't that freaked out until I kept thinking about it, and something popped in my head, and I remembered that when I first walked up and I saw this lady, she was going through that purse, and I assumed she was looking for her badge. I do not remember seeing that purse again. Not when I opened the door for her those 2 times, or when I looked back to see her when she pulled out the chair. I can't remember seeing it again. It was the weirdest thing that ever happened to me. I don't know. Maybe you can have an explanation for this. I know Detroit does not have a lot of stories and whatnot. I've listened all the way through from season 1 all the way up to the Hometown Legends of season 7, part 2. And I've only heard a few calls from Michigan, period. I don't think I've heard any from Detroit. So I don't know if there are any more listeners with experience in Detroit, but this was weird.
Thank you, caller. Your story throws out Elisa Lam vibes. She's the unfortunate Canadian woman that died mysteriously after video cameras caught her interacting with an invisible force in the Cecil Hotel elevators in Los Angeles. Her body was finally found in the hotel's water storage tank on the roof after guests reported low water pressure and a foul odor to the tap water. Her tragic death remains unsolved even today. So I'm not saying that our caller's mystery woman was a ghost, and I'm not saying she was a time traveler, And I'm not even saying that she fell victim to the same thing that took Elisa Lamb's life. But I am agreeing with our caller. The whole situation is very weird. So thank you, caller, for taking the time to share it with us. And let's help him out. I know there's got to be a few Detroit submissions out there. So if you have a story you would like to share, call the hotline at 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 1-888-608-6444. Or visit the website at monstersamonguspodcast.com and click on the Report Your Sightings tab for more options. And while you're at it, follow us on social media, and don't forget the fan group. Addie, Warren, Tony, Sarah, and John certainly know how to have a great time over there. And I should mention this coming Wednesday, the 15th, I'll be a guest on the wildly popular podcast, Hillbilly Horror Stories. You can hear Jerry and I discuss Monsters Among Us and Cryptid Crate origins, among many other things. And I'm going to use this last bit of my announcement time to say this. On average, only 1% of a podcast listeners support the show on a platform such as Patreon. I asked around, and I'm not the only one in the average there. Every single podcast that I spoke with has the same situation. Now, it's important to remember that each of these hosts, the hosts of your favorite programs, work extremely hard, and they work very long hours to produce content to bring you enjoyment. Most of us either run a show as a second job or struggle to make it a full-time gig. Now, I'm not asking you to run out and support my Patreon. That's not what this is about, though I think you would probably enjoy that. But I am asking that you go fund your favorite shows. Even if it's only a single dollar pledge. I know it sounds cliche, but it's true. Every little bit helps. So please, do me a favor. Support paranormal podcasters, support paranormal artists, and support paranormal writers and filmmakers. The more support the community gets, the more content everyone else gets to enjoy. Okay, this is me stepping off my soapbox. And since you all sat through my little rant, I've thrown together one of the best back halves of any show I've had in recent history. So sit back and enjoy this terrifying tale from Eric in Wisconsin.
Hi, Derek. This is Eric from Cross Plains, Wisconsin. Love the podcast and just wanted to leave you a story that I had happened when I was younger. I was born and raised in Tucson, Arizona, and this took place probably about early 80s, 83, I believe, in the summer of. At the time, we had moved into a new neighborhood on the north side of town. It was a nice 3-bedroom ranch-style home. It was a pretty ordinary neighborhood, nothing special about it. I was pretty fortunate that there were a few kids in the neighborhood, roughly my age. In fact, right next door was a kid about a grade younger than I was, but we were both into the same thing. We both loved G.I. Joe and action figures, and we'd play this all the time. If we weren't playing G.I. Joe, we were outside exploring the desert, which was pretty fortunate for us because we never ran into any rattlesnakes or scorpions or anything like that. Used to run into weird things all the time. Sometimes things left behind by coyotes, half-eaten cats and whatnot. But one thing that was always prevalent in the neighborhood was there was a lot of satanic symbols, and sometimes you would find old campfires and whatnot with satanic symbology that would, didn't know it at the time because I was pretty young, maybe about 7, 8 years old, but later would come to understand. But the incident or the series of what would eventually become pretty significant in my life was over at my friend's house, and we were playing G.I. Joe as usual in the living room. His mom had asked me to come back to the bedroom. I really didn't think nothing of it. I didn't really actually go into the bedroom, but stood outside the door. I mean, it was kind of strange because she was standing in the room. Her husband was there, and a couple other people in the room that I really didn't recognize. But they asked me if I wanted to see something pretty cool, so I'm like, sure. So something was going on, not really 100%. But then suddenly, in the way the bedroom was, obviously there was like a king-size bed, I'm assuming, was centralized in the middle of the room. And from just about underneath the bed came this large form, but it stayed underneath the sheets until it centered itself to about the middle of the bed. Then this form, this lump, whatever you want to say, kind of took a form, like this sheets kind of sucked itself around it. And what had first popped up was a figure from the torso up, a Native American warrior, and you could tell it had a headdress, wore a hammer, and as a war cry. Then it kind of just disappeared, and then kind of the same process happened again, except for this time a lump took the form of a cowboy, and you could see the 6-shooters, you could hear the guns go off, whooping and hollering himself, then disappear. The next figure was like a knight on a horse, but instead of coming underneath the bed, it just shot from the middle of the bed. And you can hear the galloping of the hooves and kind of just pop up in the middle. Same situation, sheet wrapped around. You can make out the forms, not a lot of great detail, but you hear the neighing of the horse and disappeared. And the last figure was probably the most scariest to me, is this figure formed in the middle, and it formed what we would stereotypically picture as a witch, long pointed hat. You could tell the facial features of what we normally say, obviously not great detail again, but she started to cackle and laugh. And she turned around and looked at me and started to laugh and said something. I don't remember what she said. In fact, I don't think I probably could have heard her at the time. I was really starting to freak out. Tears were in my eyes. My heart was pounding so hard that I could hear it in my ears. But I do remember the adults in the room were laughing. I couldn't find my friend anywhere to be, and pretty much all my memory after that kind of just blacked out. The last memory I have is walking back home crying hysterically. I never told my parents about it because I wasn't even supposed to be there at the time because they were both at work. So after that incident, when I went over to play later on, was kind of weird, but he was my buddy even after what happened. He told me he wasn't allowed to play with me anymore, and I couldn't quite figure out what happened. I wasn't sure what I did. So sometime when school started up, I ran into him again in class and at school, and he finally was speaking to me. And I had asked why he wasn't allowed to play. All he could say is that that's what his parents said. He couldn't play with him anymore. I was like, okay, that's fine. His father had recently built a tree house in the back, which was pretty much a glorified hunting blind. And because the trees in Tucson are not the greatest trees to build houses in, they got 2-inch thorns in them. But I had asked him how he liked the tree house because I had noticed that he had been playing in the tree house with his mom. And he said that he wasn't allowed to play in the treehouse. And I asked him why. He goes, well, the witch lives there. That's who I was playing with, and my parents don't want me playing in there anymore. And I thought that was kind of weird because that's the last figure I saw was there. But shortly after that, his family moved, and the house kind of sat empty for a while. And it was kind of strange that people would move in and out of that house all the time, but at most would be there 2 years, but never really heard much about if anything ever went on in that house. But shortly after they had moved, I had started seeing a figure in my room at night. And I remember the first time it happened and saw the stark figure standing over me, kind of like what some people would describe as a shadow person or possibly a hat man. It was black, almost void, and it had like a cloak and a hood over it. You can hear it kind of breathing, kind of the strange, kind of wheezy, crackling sound. And I remember freaking out and throwing the blankets over my head. And I would try to bury my head under the pillows, kind of turn my back to it. And I would look toward the door, think about running to it. But I noticed that the figure had moved over there. So I wasn't really sure what to do. So the only thing that could pop in my mind was to start singing. So I started singing songs that I learned in Sunday school. Jesus Loves Me, the B-I-B-L-E, all sorts of songs that I learned in Sunday school, and it seemed to work. Unfortunately, this went on pretty much for the rest of the time that I lived in that house. I lived in that house about 12 years. But it always happened in my room. I never really left the room, but, it seemed pretty strange because it seemed like other kids in my neighborhood experienced some of the same things. My buddy across the street used to say there was an old man who used to scratch at the window asking to come in, like a short 3-foot man. Another kid down the road used to talk about a lady that used to fly around his room and would bother him and him alone and none of his sisters. And there used to be a lot of stories like this that revolved around the neighborhood. But that's my story. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Eric. What the hell? Was this some sort of parlor trick, and Eric was simply young enough to fall for it? Or was this group literally conjuring different figures? Despite the wild claims, I can't help but be stuck on the friend's parents' approach to this entire situation. I mean, this has stranger danger written all over it. So alright, someone's gotta help me out here. Has anyone else heard of anything like this? Experienced it, heard a story about it? Know someone that experienced it? Shoot me an email. Like Eric, I really would like to get to the bottom of what might have happened here. So thank you again, Eric, for taking the time to share that one. It definitely weirded me out, big time. So do you guys remember the first call of the night? The UFO call from Len. Well, I have another that shares a lot of the same characteristics. The following was submitted anonymously from the state of North Dakota.
Hi Derek, I'm submitting a story from a time when I lived up in North Dakota. While it's a large state, the population is small enough that everyone knows each other within about 3 to 4 relations. So for privacy's sake, I'd like to keep everyone's names anonymous and will just refer to them by a letter. I'll start the story after this disclaimer so you can easily edit out this part. It's a longer story, but full of necessary information. Here we go. Hi Derek, I'd like to share a story from a time I was living in Robinson, North Dakota, which is about an hour and 20 minutes to the northeast of Bismarck in the middle of the state. I'm not originally from the state, but had moved up there in the summer of 2013 for work and had ended up living there for 3 years. My job required me to drive around the entire state for meetings, and as a result, I was on the road quite a bit at night, and I've seen some interesting things. At this point in my life, I was not necessarily a believer of the supernatural, but I wasn't opposed to the concept. The story I'm sharing now changed that. The following events occurred throughout the fall and winter of 2013 and 2014. If you have some sort of map application, I'd recommend using it during this story, as it'll help put components of the story into perspective. One evening in November, I had just left Robinson around 4:15 p.m. and was westbound on ND 36, headed to Bismarck for the midnight release of the new Xbox One console. Leaving town, the road curves to the north, then west again as it skirts the edge of a wetland. The roads in North Dakota are based on a 1 square mile grid system called sections, and while some roads are paved, the majority are gravel, and there are plenty of section lines that are just prairie trails, many of which dead end into seasonal wetlands. I had just passed a gravel road called 31st Avenue Southeast, which bisected 36, the road I was westbound on, from the north, but didn't continue to the south because of one of the wetlands. Having traveled this road many times on my way to Bismarck, I knew that the next bisecting road wasn't for 2 miles because there was another wetland between it and myself that prevented a road from being constructed. So there was just a prairie trail that dead-ended into the wetland. Keeping that in mind, right after I passed 31st Avenue Southeast, a bright amber light caught my eye to the north of me just over the top of the prairie grasses, which can easily reach 4 or 5 feet tall. It was a very bright, ambient ball of light that didn't seem to have a directional beam. As I watched, it traveled south at great speed just over the top of the grasses, crossed the road in front of me, and then disappeared from view. From the time it appeared at the edge of my periphery to the time it disappeared from view was only about 2 to 3 seconds, and at the time it crossed the road in front of me was about a quarter mile away. From my perspective, the light appeared to be about 5 to 6 feet in diameter and didn't have any distinguishing characteristics. I continued driving, keeping an eye out for crossroads to try and rationalize what I had just seen, but didn't come across one until I reached 29th Avenue Southeast, 2 miles away. This was the first time I'd ever seen anything like this, and decided to keep the event to myself. A couple of uneventful months go by until the end of January, beginning of February. I was headed back from home from Jamestown late one night, and it had hit a ground blizzard somewhere around Medina. The wind was howling and whipping up all the snow on the ground, creating whiteout conditions, and visibility was about 10 feet in front of my truck. I continued making my way west along 94, driving slowly so as not to overdrive my visibility until I reached the small town of Tappan. Fearing that I might get rear-ended by another driver, I decided to take the back road home. The 39th Avenue Southeast is a gravel road that heads north from Tappan, jogs to the west about a mile and a half, and then heads north again, coming out on ND 36 just over 5 miles to the east of Robinson, the town I lived in. The road is used frequently by local traffic, but I figured I wouldn't run into anyone on a night like this. I left Tappan and was driving slowly north, using the truck's GPS to help me navigate the road as I first hit the left and then right-hand turns which marked the halfway point. As I continued north, I had almost reached ND 36 when suddenly an almost blinding green light illuminated the dark, snowy night high in the sky to the west of my location. Keeping in mind that visibility was only about 10 feet, I struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. The light seemed to come from everywhere, perhaps because of the snow, but it was brightest at a point a couple 100 feet above the ground. As I continued to creep along the road, I reached the stop sign that signaled that I had reached ND 36. As the green light continued to shine brightly, I paused there for a moment, both to try and pick it out where the source of light was coming from, as well as to try and recall if there had been some sort of a cell tower there. I turned left onto ND 36 and continued westbound in the direction of home. The light continued to shine from what appeared to be the same position and faded from view as I drove away. Thankfully, I was able to get home without further incident. The next day, the wind had died down and visibility had returned, so I decided to drive back to the intersection to see if there was a tower there. There was not. Much like my first experience, I decided to keep what I had seen the night before to myself. Now, these two incidences might not seem so extraordinary in their current context, but several months later I discovered a chilling component to this story. It was August, and I had just bought a house in the town of Steele, about 30 minutes to the south of Robinson on I-94. I was at a party with some friends when someone began talking about strange things they had seen in the North Dakota sky recently, and others started chiming in. Realizing that I wasn't the only one who had seen something, I decided to share my stories with the group. My friends told me that this area had been a hotspot some years ago and had even been featured on Earth Files. Someone started playing the episode of the podcast, and the host introduced a family from Tappan that had been the victim of some terrifying events. It was at this moment that I froze. E, in quotation marks, the son of the family involved, had been at the heart of their encounters from 2005 to 2006, which included sightings, livestock mutilation, and a physical attack on E himself on their family farm. E had moved into the apartment across the hall from me a week before my November 2013 experience. He was about my age, a great guy, intelligent, and a hard worker. We had become friends and often played video games together, talked politics, hunting, etc., but he had never once mentioned what had happened to him. Apparently, after the story broke, he had become the subject of ridicule in town and as a result didn't talk about what happened to him anymore. In my own research, UFO experiencers tend to have recurring encounters, almost as if they're magnets for these types of events. I can't help but wonder if what I saw was a result of that. Anyway, I hope you found my story interesting, and if it's featured, I've got plenty of other stories to tell. North Dakota might seem like a desolate place to the rest of the country, but there's plenty of interesting things going on in the night sky there.
Thank you, caller. Like Michigan, North Dakota is another state that doesn't produce many submissions, but when they do, they really tell a good story. I think our last North Dakota submission was the vampire-type creature chasing the guy on the tractor. I think that's right. So thank you again for that great submission, caller. This story also reminds me a good bit of the Rendlesham Forest incident, and ironically enough, there is a nuclear storage base somewhere in the state of North Dakota, I believe it's near the city of Minot, that actually had a missile launch shut down by an unidentified flying object. But we'll cover more on that at a later date. Thank you again, caller, for taking the time. Now, our next story involves a subject I've thought a lot about growing up, thanks to an entry in a children's paranormal book from the 1980s. This is Mike's entry from the state of Pennsylvania.
Hi, Derek. My name is Mike, and I live in Pennsylvania. I just recently discovered the podcast, and I'm already becoming a big fan. I just wanted to share my story. It happened in our area about 1996 or 97. We had always heard stories about local haunted areas in our city, and during that summer, when we had nothing better to do, we decided to take up the mantle of amateur ghost hunters and would start going around late at night to various sites in the hope of finding something. One of the places we had gone to was a local landmark. There's a tunnel that passes underneath it. And we had heard lots of stories about people saying they had heard voices in the tunnel, they had seen things. If you drive through and honk your horn 3 times, you'll see a ghost, different things like that. So we all piled into the car, and probably around midnight, we got outside the tunnel, and there was a lot of nervous energy, and we're goofing around. And one of the things we had decided is if we ever did see something, instead of talking about it, we would write down what we saw. So that way no one could influence somebody else to say, well, I saw this, and then everyone else could pile on and say, oh yeah, I saw that too. So we had a piece of paper with us, and we were talking, and then suddenly everybody got really quiet and very still. And after a few minutes, we walked away from the tunnel, and we all gathered back to the car, and everybody wrote something down on the paper. And 2 guys lingered behind and then joined us about another minute later, and then they wrote down it. And when we got back to our friend's apartment, everybody had written down the same thing. A black silhouette in the darkness of the tunnel with a pickaxe working. And we were all just very excited, except the 2 guys who lingered behind wrote an additional detail that they saw another black figure seemingly come out of the wall and turn towards them, and they said it had yellow eyes, and they both wrote the same thing as well. So we were very excited that this happened. Everybody, we couldn't stop talking about it, and the next night we decided to go back up again in hopes of seeing something again. And when we got there, one of the people who had been there the night before, one of the ones who'd seen the figure with the yellow eyes, he was right behind us on the road, and he didn't get there at the same time. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and a few minutes later, he came driving up, and when he got out of the car, he was clearly very agitated, pacing around his car, and when we went over to see what happened, it looked like someone had taken a chainsaw through the back fender of his car. What he told us, and what he swears even to this day, is that whenever we were driving up there, he felt something grab his steering wheel and pull on it and tug him towards the side of the road, which would have put him into a reservoir. And he managed to get control of his car, but he scraped up against some rocks and some things on the side of the road. And I think to this day, he still won't go back up to that tunnel. So I just wanted to share that. Hopefully it's something you can use. Enjoy the podcast and keep them coming. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Mike. I recall reading this paranormal book, probably written by Daniel Cohen, that talked about a legend on the foggy moors of England, the hairy hands of Dartmoor. The bridge on the B3212 between Postbridge and Two Bridges is the location for some malevolent hauntings. The legend is that a pair of hairy hands appears on your steering wheel or handlebars and tries to force you off the road. There have been many incidents on this stretch of road, which is notorious for fatal accidents, including in 1921 when a medical officer from Dartmoor Prison died after his motorbike went out of control. This area was avoided long before motor vehicles were common on the road. Now, I did my best to find the book that I was referring to, but was not able to locate it. So does anyone else out there happen to remember that? Or am I a victim of the Mandela effect? Well, either way, it's great to know that we have our own version of the story here in the States. Although I suppose it might not be that great for anyone that finds themselves driving that stretch of road late at night. Now, if this legend interests you, I slid a link into the show notes to a pretty decent video that breaks it all down. And that's going to do it for this episode. Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Addie Lloyd and Warren Pon-Abbott. All audio used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. And that blood-curdling music you hear, that's code.ag. Thank you so much for listening, and until next week. So I decided to leave this call as the secret story because everything else is difficult and mysterious about these enigmatic entities. So why not continue that tradition? The following call was submitted by Justin in my state of California.
Hi, Derek. My name's Justin from San Diego, California. This story I have to tell you actually takes place in North Carolina in a small town called the Outer Banks. It actually comes from that mirrored men story I've been hearing so much about. And it's really funny. I heard that and it brought back this memory I haven't had in years. I was about 8 years old in the Outer Banks, and I was in this small gated community where all of the houses are very close to each other, you know, like a normal gated community. I was on the third story in my room, and the third story looks over the front of the house, which is about 30 feet to the road. Well, it was a dream, but it's insane how close these things matched people's description. There were these hunchbacked creatures that had cloaks and hoods, and you couldn't see their faces. It was 3 of them, just like everybody had said. It freaks me out to this day hearing that. The 3 of them walked down the street, and they were walking. I don't remember if it was that slow motion walk everybody talked about, but they walked down the street. The dream, I was barely sticking my head out over the windowsill, and I see these 3 cloaked figures, and of course I see them. And within about 5 seconds of looking at them, they saw me, and they stared at me. And the next thing I remember, it was morning. You know, I'm 90% sure this was a dream. You know, I don't even know if you could use this on your podcast because it's not much, but I thought it'd be worth sharing my experience. And I'll have more to bring to you. I actually spent a lot of time living up in Idlewild, which is in the San Bernardino Forest, as you would probably know. So I have some stories to tell you from there soon. But I just wanted to, put that out there and let you know. Thanks, Derek. I love your podcast. Been listening since season 1. Can't wait to hear more. Talk to you later.
Thank you, Justin. Given the fact that the encounter took place in a dream, I'm not sure how much clout we can actually give it. However, Justin is correct. The similarities are downright eerie. Now, it makes me wonder if Justin maybe heard about a mirrored men encounter and subconsciously dreamt about it later that night. Now, that may be grabbing at straws, but with these mirrored men, I feel like literally anything might be possible. Thank you again, Justin, for taking the time to share that call. And thank you for sticking around to the end of the show. Have a great night. Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I'm your guide, Derek Hayes.
Hi, my name is Legend. I'm from Willis, California. Hi, Derek. I wanted to tell you a story that happened to me at my grandpa's a pretty long time ago. So I was in my grandpa's cellar where he told us not to go for some reason. And we went in there to search for my weird porcelain doll. And when I was in there, we were just searching around, and all of a sudden my sister says, "Look at that dude." And so we all look up, and there was just a random guy standing there. He was messing around in one of our boxes that we had, and he was like playing with something, and I threw a rock at him, and he looked at me, but the rock went like right through him. I got pretty scared, so we just kept saying, "Go away," and he crawled up into the insulation and disappeared. Thank you for your time, and I love your podcast a lot. I listen to it with my mom every time we're in the car. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, buddy. I gotta say, you're much more brave than I would have been. I guarantee you I would have ran at the first sight of this guy rummaging through that box at your age. Now I have an amazing show lined up for you guys this evening. I know I say that often, but tonight, I really mean it. And I also have some big news to share as well. But first, let's kick things off with a subject people have been asking for quite some time. The following is Olivia's call from Washington State.
Hi, Derek. First of all, I'd like to say this is by far one of my favorite podcasts, and you're doing an excellent job. My name is Olivia, and I am from the West Seattle area. This happened when I was 6 years old, so this would have been around 2002, 2003. We were moving into our new house. Actually, this would have been at the point we were more settled into it. Due to it being so long ago, I could not give time of year or really knit much description beyond what I witnessed. This is honestly a bit of a scarring memory for me, and I hope this would be a bit of a way to release it. But regardless, I remember my mother's room, and especially her bathroom, having an extremely just negative energy. I don't remember why I had to go into her bathroom, but I had told myself not to be scared, and I just left a door just a little open, maybe an inch. I went into the bathroom, and in seconds, the door was pushed open a bit. I noticed movement out of my peripheral, my eyes. I looked up, and in the mirror, I saw what I, at the time, described as an iguana human. It would be about 7 feet tall, based off how tall it was in the mirror and the size of my mother's bathroom. And this sounds crazy, but it wore a trench coat and old hat, as I would say when I was a child. And, I could only see its face because of that. And I promptly ran downstairs screaming to my mother because I recall when I turned around, it was not there. And I would have chalked it up to a childhood, overactive imagination, but it was so deeply scarring for me. I just have never been able to. The old hat I will now be able to describe as so yeah, that's my story, and thank you for accepting my call. I hope you're having a wonderful time. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. I finally get to share some crazy info I've been sitting on. Hopefully you haven't heard about it. Back in 1934, a man claimed that he discovered a lost city, catacombs built beneath Los Angeles by the lizard people of LA.
Lizard People's Catacomb City hunted. Engineer sinks shaft under Fort Moore Hill to find maze of tunnels and priceless treasures of legendary inhabitants. Busy Los Angeles, although little realizing it in the hustle and bustle of modern existence, stands above a lost city of catacombs filled with incalculable treasure and imperishable records of a race of humans further advanced intellectually than the highest type of present-day peoples. In the belief of G. Warren Shufelt, geophysicist mining engineer now engaged in an attempt to wrest from the lost city deep in the earth below Fort Moore Hill the secrets of the lizard people of legendary fame in the medicine lodges of the American Indian. So firmly does Shufelt and a little staff of assistants believe that a maze of catacombs and priceless golden tablets are to be found beneath downtown Los Angeles that the engineer and his aides have already driven a shaft 250 feet into the ground, the mouth of the shaft being on the old Banning property on North Hill Street, overlooking Sunset Boulevard, Spring Street, and North Broadway.
I can already hear some of you salivating. But don't get too excited. There's more info you need to hear.
Shufelt learned the legend of the lizard people after his radio X-ray had led him hither and yon over an area extending from the public library on West 5th Street to the Southwest Museum on Museum Drive at the foot of Mount Washington. I knew I was over a pattern of tunnels, the engineer explained yesterday, as well as the position of deposits of gold. Then Shufelt was taken to Little Chief Greenleaf. The Indian provided the engineer with a legend, which, according to both men, dovetails exactly with what Shufelt say he has found.
Spoiler alert, it's not lizard people.
According to the legend as imparted to Shufelt by Macklin, the radio X-ray has revealed the location of one of 3 lost cities on the Pacific coast, the local one having been dug by the lizard people after the Great Catastrophe, which occurred about 5,000 years ago in the form of a huge tongue of fire, which came out of the southwest, destroying all in its path, the path being several hundred miles wide. The lost city, dug with powerful chemicals by the lizard people instead of pick and shovel, was drained into the ocean, where its tunnels began, according to the legend. The lizard people, the legend has it, regard the lizard as a symbol of long life. Their city is laid out like a lizard, according to the legend. Its tail to the southwest, far below 5th and Hope Streets, its head to the northeast at Lookout and Marta Streets, according to Shufelt and the legend.
Believe it or not, that actually came from an LA Times article from back on January 29th of 1934. And the misspelled headline on this article, Lizard People's Catacomb City Hunted. So it seems that these lizard people, this engineer referred to, were believed to be normal human beings that simply worshipped a lizard, and not a race of half-man, half-reptilian. But that did not stop people from talking, and from seeing actual lizard people. I can't say that I've actually heard a first-hand account myself of these things, but I do recall an episode of the hit show Monsters and Mysteries in America that covered this very legend. Here is one of those encounters that was featured in that episode.
In Anaheim, California, one November night in 2008, Angelique McQueen was walking her dog when she found herself face to face with lizard-like creatures emerging from the sewer drain.
Growing up, I had never heard of anything like a reptoid. I'd never heard of anything underground or living underground.
I never believed reptoids existed until that night, and it definitely made a believer out of me.
On November 27th, just like any other night, I decided to take my dog for a walk. It was a little chilly, and so I put on a heavier coat. As I was walking my dog, I got a very strange sensation that something wasn't right. It's one of those feelings that, danger. Like, maybe I shouldn't go this way. Maybe I should take a turn. I look over down in the drain. I notice something, and I see two red eyes glowing, staring at me. It had a round head, glowing red eyes, a pit bull type of head, and I couldn't make sense of what I was looking at. It's something I've never seen before. And before I could even think of anything, it pounced right in front of me. The fangs that I saw on this thing, it could have just devoured a person. It was very evil, sinister, something that just nothing that I've ever felt.
That clip was featured on Season 3, Episode 2 of that series. And I can't say what Olivia saw that night, but she's certainly not alone in claiming to have seen it. So thank you again, Olivia, for taking the time to share that call. And before we move on to our next call, I should mention that the article in the previous section was read/performed by David Flora of Blurry Photos Podcast. And since his name was brought up, I guess now would be as great a time as any to announce that the Kickstarter campaign for our upcoming documentary, Shadows in the Desert, High Strangeness in the Borrego Triangle, is finally live. So hit up the show notes or search the title over at Kickstarter.com and become a supporter today. This project is shaping up to be pretty amazing, so don't miss the opportunity to become part of it. Now our next dive into the supernatural takes us to the state of Idaho. This is Katie's submission.
Hey Derek, it's Katie from Idaho. I've called in before and I'm calling you now because I just a second ago had really short experience. I'm out walking my dog, same path I always walk across the road past the school, and I turn to look at our reflection in the mirror, like always. Well, not the mirror, the doors, they're full glass, and they reflect really well. And I turn to look, and I see us, and I also see this boy on a red and blue bike, and I make eye contact with his reflection, and I turn so that I can be like, hey, do you want to pet my dog? Because she loves kids. But she hadn't done anything. She hadn't made any acknowledgement that there was someone there. And I turn around, there's nobody here. It's a whole parking lot. There's not any hiding locations. There's some bushes, but they were in front of where I was. And I looked back at the window very confused, and it was still there for about a second. I turned away again, just thinking my elves were playing tricks on me. Still nobody in the parking lot. Turned back to the doors, and it's gone. It was really weird. All the hair on my body was standing up, and that was about when my dog started to pull. But she's a golden retriever, so she can pull pretty hard, and she pulled me right back towards the house. I haven't heard of any deaths at the school or anything like that, or in the neighborhood recently, or disappearances. But yeah, that was weird. I'll have to go by there again some morning. Thank you for listening to my call.
Thank you, Katie. Now, obviously, I cannot see the surroundings that Katie described, but if the area looks anything like what's in my imagination, I may have a bit of an idea here. Is it possible that the boy was not behind Katie, but rather in front of her? I'm thinking he may have been inside the building, riding his bike, which could explain how he was able to simply disappear. So in other words, she was seeing a real boy instead of his actual reflection. Now, of course, as I always say, I was not there, so I can't definitively say that's exactly what happened. But it could provide at least one logical explanation for an otherwise unexplainable encounter. So thank you, Katie, for sharing. What do you guys say we switch gears here a bit and field a call from places possibly out of this world? This entry hails from the Tar Heel state of North Carolina. Kim, the mic is yours.
Well, my name is Kim. I live in the North Carolina state, and this story happened to me about 12 years ago. This is a true story. About 12 years ago, me and my husband and my mother were in the house, and it was towards the evening time. It was a clear evening around between 6 and 8 p.m., and my mother was in her bedroom, and she kept seeing something outside. We live near the airport, so I was thinking, well, maybe what she's seeing is an airplane. And she just kept going on and on about it, telling me, hey, come here, take a look, there's something outside. And I didn't believe her. So I grabbed my camera. This was before we had all these fancy cell phones that take video footage of everything. I had a digital camera. And so I ran outside and I looked and I didn't see anything at first. And so something just said, look up. And so I looked up, and towards the east area, there was a spaceship, a UFO. And it was not a large UFO. It was about the size of 3 cars. And it proceeded to come towards me. And I would estimate that it was maybe about 50 feet in the air. And it was flat. It was rectangular. And it appeared to be sort of like a silver or whitish color. And it had about 12 lights underneath. And it was completely flat, but I could distinctly see a cockpit. And as it came, it started coming towards my direction, and it kept coming closer and closer and closer. And at that point, I started stepping back. I could look inside the cockpit, and I saw 2 beings, and they appeared to look human, a male and a female. I could see longer hair on one person and shorter hair on the other, but I couldn't distinctly make out their faces, but they had humanoid features. All I could remember is I just kept staring at it as it approached me, and it came closer and closer, and the next thing I knew, I was underneath it, and it flew over me. And as it flew over me, it was rather slow. It didn't stop. It just kept going. Like I stated, I was about 50 feet underneath it, so I could get pretty good detail of it. It was whisper quiet. There was no smoke, no smell, no odor, no sound, absolutely nothing. And it just took off and went across the trees and completely disappeared. And so from that day forward, I'm completely convinced that there are people amongst us, or humanoids or aliens that look like we do, that are from different planets, that, interact with us on planet Earth. I'll never forget that, but this really did happen, and I wasn't asleep. I had no alcohol. I don't do drugs. It really did happen. There's a lot of mysteries in this world.
Thanks, Kim. This is an incredible account. It's not every day that someone claims to have stood 50 feet below a genuine UFO. In fact, most people that find themselves in that particular situation find that being below the UFO is the least of their worries. Many are in fact abducted from that very position. I think of the infamous case of Travis Walton, whom was abducted and held for several days back in 1975. If you're not familiar, that's a wild story that I'll save for another time. But if you're impatient, just watch the movie Fire in the Sky. That movie scared the hell out of me when I was a kid. Anyhow, I'm getting off track here. The question I mean to pose is whether or not Kim was also a victim of some sort of abduction, but simply cannot recall the memory. She mentioned the following quote: "The next thing she knew, the UFO was on top of her." I might be leading the witness here a bit, but that, for me, left some room for some missing time. Of course, these are mere questions asked, and not claims stated. When something as extraordinary as what Kim witnessed is reported, it's difficult not to hypothesize about all the terrifying possibilities. So thank you again, Kim, for that spectacular submission. Now our next story is a bit uplifting. The following was submitted by Elizabeth from Parts Unknown.
Hi, Derek. My name is Elizabeth, and I was just listening to your podcast, and I heard a gentleman named Hector call in and talk about him flying over his apartment. Now, I had something a little different, but it was flying. It was probably 1979, 1980, and I was living in Lake in the Hills, Illinois. Our house was set up on a tri-level. The top of the house was the living quarters, The middle ground was my dad's office, and the basement was like a full, I'd say it was completely, as far as my memory goes, it was completely redone basement with carpet and everything. I have a vivid memory of standing at the top of the stairs on the top floor and flying down the set of stairs, turning and landing on the basement floor stairs with my feet tingling, but I definitely never touched the floor, and I have this clear as day vision. Now, I was 4 years old, so definitely something that I don't know, but I'm just telling you, I just have this feeling, and I know that it happened to me, and when I heard Hector's story, I said, that's happened to me too, so I really, truly believe that it did. I hope you can use this, and I hope it helps other people who have had this experience. Thank you so much, and have a great night. I really appreciate your podcast.
We appreciate the submission, Elizabeth. I will confess, my entire life I've had a reoccurring dream that I, too, possess the ability to fly. Each time in my dream, I would remember that I've always had this ability, but simply forgot how. Now, I realize a dream is a dream, but these were always somehow different for me, although I've never really figured out why. Perhaps Elizabeth, Hector, and I have a suppressed ability that defies the laws of gravity. Or it might just be fair to say that the human mind is a wonderfully creative tool. Thanks again, Elizabeth, for that fun experience. Speaking of flying, merchandise is practically launching out of the shop, which coincidentally can be found at Monsters Among Us podcast /shop, and we have several new items to add to the storefront in the next week or so. And for those that have been asking about the totes, they're here. I just need to get them up and listed, along with the brand new t-shirt design that I think you guys are gonna love. So give me a week or two. This stuff is coming, I promise. And it shouldn't go without saying, a big thanks to everyone that's picked up a shirt already. I really appreciate that. Okay then. Well, since we're tiptoeing around the lighter side of the paranormal, why not a bit of a heartwarming ghost story as well? This is Brandon's submission from the state of Nebraska.
Hi there, my name is Brandon. I am from Nebraska. Just recently got into your podcast, and I just have to say I love it. I kind of have a story just recently here. I don't know kind of if this goes into with what you're trying to do on the podcast. It's more of a positive outlook on things rather than a scary or spooky kind of story. But recently in January of this year, 2019, one of our family cats passed away. She was kind of young considering, but she'd spent some of her time outside the early parts of her life. Therefore, it kind of shortened her life expectancy. And she passed away in our living room in my wife's arms. Family cat, we loved her very much. She's the mother of all the other cats that we have. She's kind of the matriarch of the family of cats that we have. And her name was Mama Kitty because she's the mother. And after she passed away, we have a son who's just over a year old now. And I've heard things that babies and senior citizens are kind of closer to that veil between life and death and the unknown, and so they're able to see things better, such as old people seeing angels when they're about to die, or children seeing things in their closets, stuff like that. I've heard that the people on the first part and the last part of life kind of more connected with those things. Well, recently we've been seeing some flashes of gold in the house, like above us, where she used to lay in her house, her little house that she has, that we made for her, is like a bed that we got. And we'd look in the corner of our eye and thought we'd see her or see, like I said, a flash of gold. And it's kind of weird because that's kind of the color of her urn that we got for her. And the baby, one night, I saw this flash of gold happen above my head in the living room, and I looked up and it was gone. I saw it, and as soon as I focused on it, it disappeared. But the son of mine is just staring at the ceiling where this flash of gold was, giggling and laughing. At his first year of life, this cat was basically like a second mother to him. He was around this cat all the time. The cat saw him all the time. And so just recently we've been seeing these flashes of gold, and wherever we see the flash of gold at, we see our son take interest in that area. And he gets really excited and giggly and happy and tries to go towards it and everything like that. And we can't help but think that it's our cat that passed away, Mama Kitty. So I just want to kind of give that story kind of a positive outlook on the paranormal, how we think our cat is still with us and still watching over our son and still watching over her kids and just still about the house and hasn't left us yet. It's just really strange to see these flashes of gold and see him focus on where we're noticing them at. And we don't see anything, but he finds such enjoyment in them. It's just really strange. So I just want to share that kind of positive outlook on possible paranormal activity in our home and everything like that. So I appreciate it. I love your podcast. I'm so happy to have become a listener. Thank you for taking the time to hear my voicemail, whether it gets shared or not. I just want to share that story with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Brandon. I completely understand the bond. To many, our pets are very important people in our lives. So it makes sense that the connection would continue after her passing. And it's not like we haven't heard these stories before. They're found in abundance in paranormal lore. But I do think it's important to point out that this may be a different entity, spirit, ghost, whatever it is you want to call it, and not your late pet. If I've learned anything from ghost hunting TV shows, it's that ghosts are often trying to conceal their identity, and posing as a friendly mama cat just might be a perfect disguise. Thanks again, Brandon, for taking the time. And speaking of taking time, please take a few minutes to rate and review the show on your platform of choice. Now, I've seen a lot of glowing reviews lately that are accompanied by 3 or 4 stars. Don't forget, guys, this is the internet, so if it's not 5 stars, it's a negative review. I know, I don't like that either, but that's the way it is. Anyway, a big thank you to everyone that's taken the time to help me reach more listeners. You guys want to hear something gross? Well, I think BB in Texas might have the perfect tale to get that job done. Here is her call.
Hi, Derek. This is BB. I live in Dallas, Texas. This happened when I was 13 years old, and I'm 33 now. It happened in a small town called Burnett, Texas. It's in central Texas. And basically what happened was me and my sister were playing in the backyard, and we lived on 10 acres of land. We only had about 1 acre cleared, and we had our trailer in the middle of that 1 acre that was cleared, and we were in the backyard playing, and we had about 3 dogs at the time, and they were all chow dogs just running around. And my stepdad was out in the backyard doing some work, and he saw that there was something in our dog's mouth. So he told my sister to go over and get it out of his mouth because he didn't know what he was chewing on. And so my sister took it out of his mouth and screamed and dropped it on the floor. And so I walk over and I'm asking her, I'm like, what is it? What is it? And she's like, it's a human hand. And I look down and no joke, it's a human hand. All of the skin is gone and all of the muscles and, veins, everything like that is gone. But you can see the bones, you can see the tendons, everything was there. It was like from the wrist down. And my stepdad walks over and he looks at it and he tells my sister to pick it up. And my sister said no. And so he told me to pick it up, and I said no. And so he told my sister again, pick it up and put it in the trash. And so my sister picks it up and puts it in the trash. We didn't call the cops or anything, but still to this day, I think that something was on our property, but we have no idea what happened. Thanks, and I have more stories. I'll be calling in. That's just the weirdest, grossest one I have. Thanks, and have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, BB. That is gnarly. And I suppose it would be irresponsible of me not to say the authorities probably should have been notified. It doesn't take much of an imagination to picture a half-buried murder victim rotting in a Texas sun, only to have old Fido come along and, well, you can picture the rest. But I feel it would also be irresponsible of me not to mention that once degloved, or Once the skin has been removed from any large mammal's paw, it closely resembles a human hand. For example, if you had a degloved black bear paw, with its claws removed, which is something hunters occasionally do when they process bear, leaving a basic structure that, to the untrained eye, could appear exactly like a human hand. I've tossed a photo up in the show notes, so check it out if you're not squeamish. Let me know what you think. That's one that'll make me think for a while. While the bear paw theory is possible, I don't know that it's any more likely than it being a genuine human hand. So think about that as you're trying to sleep tonight. Let's cleanse our palates with something a little ghostly. The following was submitted by Cassie in the state of Arizona.
Hi, this is Cassie from Phoenix, Arizona. I wanted to call and tell my story that happened a few years back, around 2010, I want to say. It happened up in the town of Payson, Arizona. It was around 4th of July, I want to say, and me, my little sister, my boyfriend at the time, and my parents decided to go up to the local rodeo they have there. The day we got there, we just decided that it was too late to go do anything, so we went to a little motel right in the center of downtown, and it was, at the time, really rainy and cold and just kind of a gloomy day. So we decided to stay in and watch movies. A little backstory about my parents is my mom is a total free spirit hippie, and my dad is about the polar opposite, and he's a very cowboy, stern, no funny business kind of man. It's probably around 10 o'clock at night, and me and my boyfriend and my little sister were all inside the motel watching a movie, and my parents were outside smoking. We had one of the outdoor hotel rooms, and shining into our room was kind of a spotlight that was in the parking lot. And since it was raining so hard and all of that, we unfortunately had to deal with the spotlight going on and off and on and off. And it'd happen about every 30 seconds. It'd turn on and turn off. At one point, lightning hit really hard, and it kind of dimmed out our power, and the TV shut off. Didn't think anything of it. My boyfriend got up, turned the TV back on. Everything was fine. Everything was all good, but the spotlight didn't come back on. At the time, we didn't even notice it, didn't even think anything of it. About 10 minutes later, my parents came back in, and, we're kind of bickering about something, seemed really confused. And, I asked, what's up, what's going on? And my mom finally tells me, we saw a ghost. And my dad's kind of like, it can't be that, And my mom describes to me what she saw, or what they both saw. And what it was is the motel was at the base of a hill, and there was a street going up the hill to the neighborhood up top. And it's dark as could be, pouring rain, cloudy, and my parents, sitting outside, like I said, smoking, talking, and they see a woman walking down this hill in what kind of looked to be the old-fashioned Western wear, which they thought was a little odd, but the rodeo has, it's one of the world's oldest rodeos, so they all dress up in Western costumes, so they're both thinking, why is this woman walking in the pouring rain at 10 o'clock at night? And she had kind of a weird glow to her, my mom said. It's dark out, and besides the spotlight, which is not shining on her, it's shining back at my parent, there's no light, no street lights, nothing. So they're watching her, and she's not paying attention to them, just walking down the street. And that's when that crash of lightning and thunder happened, which turned off the spotlight and kind of freaked out my parents. They'd been watching this woman walk down this hill for about 20 seconds or so. And after the spotlight went out, they kind of realized, they go to look back at the woman, and she's not there. And like I said, the hill with the road going down of it kind of ended right at the base of where our motel was. There's nowhere this girl could have gone. And, both my parents were completely stumped. And like I said, my dad is just no BS kind of guy. And even he had told us, I don't know what we saw. I don't know where she went. I don't necessarily believe in ghosts, but that would be the closest thing I have ever seen to what we would consider a spirit. And, my mom is absolutely dead set it was a ghost. And we told her, that's kind of crazy. I personally think it's circumstantial, but, I was like, the lighting kind of went out, the TV shut off, and the spotlight didn't come back on. And that's kind of when we all realized, the spotlight's still not back on, which it had been flicking on and off for about a solid 2 hours. And just the whole thing was so weird. And to this day, my dad, who won't admit that what he saw was what we all think was a ghost, but it was just kind of a weird coincidence. And yeah, but I love the show. I listen to it every day at work. I appreciate all you do. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Cassie. If you think about this, it sort of checks out. I'm sure by now everyone has heard the theory that spirits or entities pull electricity from devices to manifest and communicate. Well, Doc Brown said it best. There's 1.21 gigawatts in a bolt of lightning. Although, since he pronounced gigawatts incorrectly, I'm going to double-check his work. According to windpowerengineering.com, a bolt of lightning releases an average of 10 billion watts, otherwise known as 1 gigawatt. So I'd say old Doc was close enough. To put it in perspective, one lightning strike holds enough electricity to power 56 American homes for a full day. So where am I going with all this, you ask? What is a better source of energy than a bolt of lightning? Is there a possibility that the entity Cassie's parents saw was able to manifest because of that lightning? Has anyone heard of ghostly activity being created or summoned by a lightning strike? If so, hit me up. I'd really like to hear about it. And while you're at it, be sure to share any paranormal, supernatural, or just plain strange, true encounter. You can do so through the hotline at 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 1-888-608-6444. Or you can visit the website for more submission options. From ghost cats to lizard men, this episode seems to have it all. Well, almost. But I think this submission from Alice in New Hampshire will likely check another phenomena off of our list. Here is her call.
Hi, Derek. This is Alice again. I called a while ago about my experience at a New England summer camp, and my friend helped me get rid of what I thought was a shadow man by putting her legs through it. Anyway, I was listening to the podcast trying to fall asleep tonight, and a fellow New Englander was telling his story about military thing and orbs in the sky and seeing what he thought was an alien in Maine. And that got me thinking about a story that a relative told us about another New England lake. So before I get to that, I'll zoom out and give a little bit of context. My mom's cousins, they were really close, and when my sisters and I were younger, we would go up to their lake cottage on a lake in New Hampshire for a weekend or so and just hang out and tube and swim and, barbecue. And one of the husbands of my mom's cousins, his name was Kenny, and he was an eccentric, really lovely guy, but just very interesting. And my sisters and I debate to this day whether or not this story is real, but we get into really interesting, spooky conversations. Bigfoot was usually the topic when we'd build a fire. But Kenny swore that one night when he was asleep in this particular cottage where we were all staying, he woke up to the sound of the mice traps around the cottage all going off. It started as one, and then he was like, oh, great, they're working. We're getting rid of this rodent problem. And then he was kind of greeted with one after the other, to the extent that for all these traps to be going off, there would have to be, an army of mice suddenly in the cottage, and he knew that wasn't true. He recalls being really apprehensive. He recalls a really bright light, and he recalls a figure in the style of a typical gray alien suddenly looming over him. And then the last thing he remembers is the creature's finger touching his knee, and the increasing of the bright light and an excruciating pain in his knee. And the next thing he knew, he woke up and his knee was in great pain. He eventually went to the doctor, and the next morning there was apparently a little red outline of where the creature touched his knee. And the doctor examined it. They were stumped. They had to do x-rays. It became a big deal. We're totally mystified by this. And the only way you could have gotten this injury is if you took a hospital-grade laser, and I have no idea what that means, but that's the term he used, and somehow hit your knee with it. I don't really remember details beyond that, but Kenny said it was a really terrifying experience. They had to do some sort of medical procedure to fix his knee. I can't remember if there were any other experiences there, but yeah, it's a creepy story that my sisters and I to this day still wonder if it was true. But it's in that part of New Hampshire where you wouldn't be surprised. Spooky, remote. Yeah, that's my tale. Love the podcast, as does everybody else. But yeah, I wanted to share it, and thanks for the opportunity. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you, Alice. This story gives off serious communion/Whitley Strieber vibes. If you recall, we mentioned that book, film, and author in late Season 8. His events taking place in nearby upstate New York. And I should mention, at first I thought this was simply a sleep paralysis case, until Alice mentioned the odd injury on Kenny's knee. Something about that detail really hit home with me. So thank you again, Alice, for sharing those stories. This is one of those that we would otherwise never have heard. All right, these last two calls are wild, and you're going to love them. But the Kickstarter launch is not the only big news I have for the week. For those of you that use Reddit, the newest member of the Monsters Among Us team, and I suppose keeper of the subreddit, everyone please welcome Joshua Morphus as a new member of the team. A huge welcome and an even bigger thank you to Joshua. So if you'd like to join that subreddit, just search Monsters Among Us and you should find it. Otherwise, check tonight's show notes. And while you're at it, hit up the rest of our social media. I've really upped my Instagram game lately, and I've also started reviewing listener-submitted videos on YouTube. I try to do at least one of those a week, so check those out. And lastly, but not leastly, the amazing community over at the Facebook group and page. The page is cool and all, but the group, well, that's where it's at. Addie, Warren, Tony, John, and Sarah have created one of the safest and most interactive paranormal groups on all of Facebook. So search Monsters Among Us Podcast on Facebook and join today. And now, ladies and gentlemen, those last two calls I told you about. The first of the two is, to be honest, something I simply can't explain. So why don't we start there? The following is Billy's submission.
Hello, Derek. This is Billy, repeat offender. I am coming from parts unknown, but this story happens to take place in Arkansas in 2000 when I was 12 years old. And this one's going to be short and sweet. I'm just looking for to see if anybody else has seen anything similar. And this time it's a cryptid. So, I believe it was a cryptid. You can maybe help me out on this. In 2000, smartphones really hadn't become a thing, and people still got together and socially, I would say, especially kids. And my dad, for my 12th birthday, bought a telescope for the kids to use outside. And in rural Arkansas, it's real nice to look up at the sky, clear, no light pollution, anything like that. My older brother, he was 18, set up the telescope so we could look at the moon. And there's a few kids, probably four. I had three brothers, and another family came over with three kids as well. And I took my turn to look up at the moon, and I can only say I saw what I can describe as three dragons. And it was super, super confusing because when I first looked into this telescope, they were what appeared to be upside down, and I just couldn't understand what it was. I stared at it for maybe about 5 to 6 seconds. I mean, they were scaly, black in color, fairly large, and I got my brother's attention to look, and he looked into the scope, called my dad. He came over and looked, and at that time, he said he didn't see anything, and I looked back in there, and I don't know whether they just flew into the darkness or maybe onto the other side. But after years and years of pondering, like, why would they be upside down? I was thinking maybe it was a reflection, or I just couldn't put my fingers on it. But now, older, I think that they appeared to be upside down, or as if you were looking down on them, is because they were maybe flying on the moon. I have not heard anybody else mention anything ever, and that's why I'm sharing this story, to see if I'm just plain crazy, or if anybody else has had just any experience of any sort along that lines. So thank you again for your podcast, and you have a good day.
Thanks, Billy. We can file this one under stories too crazy to be true, but somehow still feel real. I highly doubt there's a species of dragon, or any other reptile for that matter, living on the moon. So how else do we explain what Billy saw? One thought that I will entertain is that Billy's father saw the gift of the telescope as an opportunity to add a little magic to some kids' lives. It wouldn't take a ton of work to sell an effect like that to children. But looking at this from another angle, I wonder if this is truly the only experience with these strange dragon-like creatures, or if, like Cassie's lightning strike apparition, some listeners out there may have some insight on this story. Now, I'm very interested in this story, but I suspect there's probably a logical explanation. We just haven't figured it out yet. So thank you again, Billy. It was a great entry, and hopefully, I'm wrong. Okay, guys. We're down to our last call of the evening, and you're really going to enjoy this one. The following story should have been included in the first responder special last week, but I wanted to spend a little more time on it, so without further delay, the following was submitted by a man named Sue from the state of California.
Hey, Derek. You just call me Sue, boy named Sue. I'm calling about first responders, and I want to start off by talking about Scotty's call on the Halloween episode about Coulterville, California, where he found a coyote skull. I am from the area, Mariposa, California, a little bit south there. Coyote Man in the area, from what I understand, is a Sierra Miwok spirit or being that they kind of cursed the area with when they lost Yosemite area. And it's known to be a trickster and whatnot, and will lure you at campsites and, use your family's voices or your mom's voice or your dad's voice and so on and so forth. And, I like to think that he could, leave a pristine coyote skull out in the field so someone would pick it up and toy with them, and hence the bad dreams, whatever he had. So getting back to my story, this is for the first responder deal. I'm a subcontractor for CAL FIRE, working on a crew where we run heavy equipment, excavators and dozers, doing fire lines and clean up and stuff after all the fires go through or during a fire. So it was 2018 in July, and we were working in Mariposa, California, our hometown, on the Ferguson fire, and we're out in the Jersey-Dale area. We're up on a ridge, and we're heading down the hill and facing north. I'm pretty sure it's north. And these ridges have steep exposures on both sides, but they're pretty wide, between 150 yards to 80 yards at the narrowest. And we're pushing down as far as we can to get a fire line put in. And I'm a swamper, so I'm working out in front of the guy operating the dozer, 50 yards to 80 yards out in front of him. And we have closed circuit walkie-talkies, so it's just me and him communicating on them, and the agencies don't have to hear our banter. We have a scanner, so he has all the ears. If the CAL FIRE or Park Service or Forest Service needs us to get out of there, they contact him, and he'll call me back. So we're making our way down this ridge when he keys up the mic and says, "Hey, dude, come back to the tractor." So I'm thinking in my head, it's time to hightail out. Fire had changed direction or whatnot. Fire was burning up from our right, up the ridge a little bit in a small area where it's not too much of a hot area right now. The fire's more in a different area. To our left, it kind of had already burned down that ridge. And so I think the fire maybe change direction, a wind change is going to happen that we don't know about. We're getting out of here. So I get up on the cab of the tractor. I'm leaning the window, and he goes, dude, do you see that down there? So I'm looking down. I can make a silhouette of a person, it seems, and it's coming from our right, and it's kind of slowly moving up the ridge. And at first, in my mind, I was thinking, one of the hotshot crews or something's coming up to us. Maybe they're coming with us to get out of here. And as I'm looking down, it kind of stops, and I'm starting to get a frame of reference of how big it is to some obstacles I had seen next to bushes and trees and stumps that were down there. And it had been standing 7-8 feet tall, probably. Kind of starting to get a little bit spooked out, considering the whole local ledge was a coyote man. I'm like, it's time to get out of here, man. Started getting scared, and as it starts moving again, it makes its way diagonally across the ridge, kind of getting closer to us as it walks by. Our dozer has big LED lights all over it, so it's lit up, but there's smoke in there, so you can't really make out too much stuff. As it's getting closer, though, it gets easy to see it. And it's not like a dog man and that kind of stuff. It has very human-esque features and a build. And as it walks past us, it's like a darkish brown color it looked to be, but almost looked charred, like it had made its way to the fire, like the fire had pushed it out. And as it walks past us, it gives you like the scold of like, your parents or something being almost disappointed in you. And which, we're knocking trees over and tearing up the earth and destroying its environment if it is out there living. And it just kind of kept on walking and walked down this ridge off to the left. And, these ridges are pretty steep exposure. We hunt the area and stuff like that. And it can take me a couple hours to get up and down some of these. And it made its way like it was nothing. So as we went and looked at the tracks of this bipedal animal we saw, from all the dirt we had turned up with the dozer, it was kind of almost a powdery substance, We call it moon dust up here. And you couldn't really make anything out, but you can tell there's big impressions. The bipedal movement the toes had kicked out, like it was being aggressive in its walk. It wasn't being real easy on its feet. Like it was trying to move fast, but it really couldn't, could be an injury from the fire or whatnot. We don't know what it is, but there is lure from this area that there's Bigfoots and then the Coyote Man and all this stuff like that. And we're not far from the Sierra Camp stories of Ron Moorhead, who actually used to live in this same town. And I've had conversation with him about this stuff, and it's all a little interesting and stuff. That's my story with whatever I encountered, if it was the Coyote Man or Bigfoot or just a big hairy guy in the woods, who knows. But that's my story, my first responder incident. Have a great day, and thank you for a good show, Derek.
Thank you, Sue. I love the name, and I love that song. Okay, so let's be honest, that's a lot to digest. So let's address one topic at a time. This Coyote Man thing, well, it's news to me. Although I can't say I'm all that surprised. Not only is the coyote considered a trickster by many cultures of Native Americans, but they also spoke of a man-like version of this beast. The stories depicted the creature having a man-like body, but with coyote fur, eyes, and ears. Basically a coyote head. Well, that's about the extent of what I was able to dig up. But just one more thing. You see, I found a few first-hand encounters, although neither really sell me on the legend. The first was reported to Lon Strickler over at Phantoms and Monsters, and was reported from Silverton, Colorado. Apparently, a couple was driving down the road, passing cornfields on either side of the road, and a strange coyote jumped out in front of the car, causing the driver to lock up the brakes. The couple described the creature as odd-looking, with tight skin and human-like eyes. What happens next is insane. The animal disappears into the corn, only to reemerge seconds later as a naked man. I've linked to that story in the show notes. And the other first-hand encounter is more in line with the legends. Our good friends over at Beyond Creepy on YouTube have a video dedicated to another encounter that sounds quite similar to the legend. To summarize it, a family in Oklahoma saw an upright creature in their backyard. It had yellow eyes and looked like an upright coyote. It saw the family on the back porch and ran away. I've also linked to Beyond Creepy's video, so be sure to check that out if this kind of story suits you. Now, I do my best to be logical and reasonable without ruining the magic of all this. Because quite frankly, just because something isn't likely to exist doesn't mean it can't. But what I'm rambling towards is that I'm not buying the Coyote Man as a cryptid. I struggle enough with Dogman and the Beast of Bray Road, so instead I think this is just a mythical character and less of a creature of the night. The coyote was the perfect character to blame when things suddenly go south. Always the trickster. But then again, like Sue mentioned, what is more trickster than convincing someone to take a haunted skull home? I certainly know I would have lugged it back if I stumbled upon it. Well guys, we'll have to dissect the Bigfoot portion of this call at a later time, because my time is up. Thank you again, Sue, for that submission. Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Addie Lloyd and Sarah Carter Hayes. The spooky track that you're hearing? That's co.ag. Thank you so much for listening, and until next week. Oh, come on. Did you really think I wasn't going to talk about Sue's Bigfoot sighting? Of course I have to discuss this, but I'm short on time, so I'm moving the content over to the secret portion of the show. Now, believe it or not, there's still many people out there that turn the episode off before this segment, so I'm pleased that you're here with me. Now, when I heard Sue's story, it rang a bell. I was actually on a television show a few years back called In Search of Monsters. It was my very first appearance, and I was less than stellar, so I doubt I'm in it much. But as part of the research they required we do, there was a story from a place called Battle Mountain, Nevada. A story not unlike Sue's. The following letter was supposedly written by an anonymous government employee and submitted to the BFRO, the Bigfoot Field Research Organization, on August 7th of 1999. The letter refers to an August 6th, 1999 forest fire on Battle Mountain in Nevada. The following is a portion of that letter. I observed an animal wounded by fire moving on all fours, not like a bear, more like an ape. Firefighters captured the animal, then contacted a local vet, medical doctor, the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Department of Interior, and the Bureau of Land Management, and got them on the scene. The animal was tranquilized and moved to an unknown location. Those at the scene were told not to talk about what they saw. The animal was approximately 7.5 feet tall, with human-like arms and legs, and a face not like a man or an ape, but mixed between. The genitalia, male, uncircumcised, and human-like. Hair covering most of the body except the chest. The chest has hair but sparse. Hands with sparse hair as well. The palms were bare, but with 5 digits and an opposable thumb. It attempted to communicate with caregivers once it realized they were attempting to care for it. Multiple burns on the hands, feet, and body, some 2nd and 3rd degree. Using the rule of 9s, approximately 45% of the body was covered in burns. Now I've linked to this actual article in tonight's show notes. I highly recommend everyone sit down and read it. Now I'm certainly not saying that I believe anything that I'm reading in this particular article. But if you think about it, if a creature like this exists, surely a few would perish in a fire from time to time. And naturally, you would think someone would come upon one. In other words, this is a story that I would expect to hear if the Bigfoot was real. Now, I certainly can't speak to the validity of either stories, but there are other tales like this out there, so make of that what you'd wish. But for now, thank you, Sue. I really enjoyed your entry. And thank you for sticking around to the end of the program. Have a great night. Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Welcome back to the program and thank you for giving me an hour to scare you silly. I've assembled one hell of an episode for you guys this evening, and I think this episode just about has it all. So to kick us off this evening, we begin with a caller named Orion from the state of Idaho. Take it away, buddy.
Hello, Derek. My name is Orion, and I live in Victor, Idaho, and I am 11 years old, and I am going to be telling you about this terrifying story I had when I was hanging out at my friend's house. My parents called me and told me that it was time to leave, so I walked out, and I ran through a bunch of cars, and I saw this giant thing, 2 long legs and a head, no limbs, nothing. There was only 2 eyes, no mouth, nothing at all. And it was terrifying, and I think I startled it because it just froze there, and I ran off as fast as I could. I went and told my parents and even Drew about it, and we came to check, and it was gone. We never found a trace of it ever again. Thank you so much for your podcast. It is amazing. I just want to know what it is. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Orion. That certainly sounds like a hair-raising encounter. And believe it or not, there are stories from the state of California that seem to describe exactly what Orion saw. And get this, there's actually video. 2 of them, in fact. But since this isn't television, I'll allow the Fresno Bee and Weird Fresno author Michael Banty to tell you all about the Fresno Nightcrawler.
Fresno's over 100 years old. It's starting to have its stories. And one night, cameras happen to capture these figures, these creatures, as some people call them. They're now called the Fresno Nightcrawlers. These 2 figures, maybe 18 inches, 24 inches tall, just kind of strolling across the guy's lawn late at night. That was the only time he ever saw them. Maybe 6 years later, back in 2011, opening some of these parts, somebody said they saw the same things. Those look a little bit different than the Fresno video. They're a little bit taller and their movements are a little bit different. From that, there's been all these pictures drawn of, there's a lot of these cute pictures. I even saw a plushie once. Somebody actually made a plushie and they were selling it, I believe, on Etsy. The story kind of grew out of this little video that was shot 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago. I wrote about it 10 years ago. I think the video was maybe 15 years ago. And it's kind of just grown from there. My brain is telling me this is one video. It was 10 years ago. Nothing's really been seen since then. If they were an actual creature, why were they only seen once? And that was it. It's one of those weird stories. Weird Fresno. I mean, it's an urban legend now, really.
For what it's worth, many people claim the first video to be a hoax or a prank, orchestrated using puppets of some sort. And they also think the second video, supposedly taken just outside Yosemite National Park, is also believed to be a hoax, this time using CGI. Now, I've linked to the Fresno Bee video and the accompanying article. You can see both of those videos there, so take a look and tell me what you think. And thank you again, Orion, for calling in. I hope this sheds some light on your little mystery. Now, as I was selecting calls for this episode, it dawned on me that it's been quite a while since we did a story about shadow people. Well, luckily for us, Kevin from Georgia is just what we need to rectify that situation. Here's Kevin's call.
Hey, this is Kevin from Marietta, Georgia, and I'm calling about my encounter I don't know what you would call it, man in the black hat or shadow figures, or I think season 2, episode 5, some girl had a similar encounter. So I was about 7 or 8 maybe, and my cousins had just moved into a brand new house that they just bought, and they had this life-size cardboard cutout of a Halo character in one of the closets and asked if I wanted it. I guess I was around that age that was a thing. And I said, yeah, I wanted it for my room. So I put it in my room, and I put it in the corner, and out of my window there's a little bit of light coming in from the street lamp. And everything was fine for a couple of days. I don't remember exactly when it started to happen, but one night I wake up and I see it moving. It's like it has a cane, it's wearing like a suit, and it's got like a top hat. And it starts dancing. Like, I don't know what kind of dance it would be, just like old dancing. And I wasn't sleep paralysis because I can move, and I got up and ran to my parents' room and slept there for the remainder of the night. It just didn't happen once. It happened 3 times actually. The second time, it was a couple nights later. I don't remember exactly how many days. I woke up in the middle of the night again, and it wasn't in the corner anymore. Actually, it was right above me, like leaning over my bed, looking at me in the face. But I couldn't see a face. It was just a black figure again, top hat, suit, and a cane. And this time it didn't dance. It just kind of looked at me and then walked away, and I ran to my parents' room again. Well, they were kind of irritated by that point, so my dad decided to sleep with me for a couple of nights just so I could calm down and just shut up about it. And that's when it happened the third time, was with my dad. We were both sleeping, both in my bed, and it happened again, but this time it moved and it leaned up against the wall, kind of like those cutouts of a cowboy with smoking a cigarette, 1 foot up on the post or something. I don't know if you can picture that, but that's how it was. I didn't say anything to my dad, but kind of just poked at him, and he just said, mm-hmm. And then the next day we talked about it, and yeah, he said he saw it too. So needless to say, the next day we took that cardboard cutout out of my room and threw it away, and ever since then, I haven't had anything move in my room. But yeah, that one girl who talked about the cane, really, it gave me shivers. That's what inspired me to call. Anyway, love the show. Your voice is pretty great for this narrating thing. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. I'll tell you what I liked about Kevin's call, and it probably won't surprise anyone. How great is it that the dad actually saw the figure as well? I see it as a small victory to kids everywhere that were brave enough to speak up about what they saw, only to have their parents dismiss them outright. And could you imagine being in that father's shoes? I'm sure he was certain that Kevin was making up his claims. I picture it as the scene from any 80s or 90s alien/kids film, especially the part where the parents realize they've been living with an extraterrestrial for 6 months. So thank you again, Kevin, for sharing. I really got a kick out of that one. Now, moving along, our next call of the evening comes to us from Chloe, in parts unknown.
Hey Derek, it's Chloe. Still binging your backlogs of episodes. I was listening to season 5, episode 2, and one of the callers had mentioned when he was a child being terrified by this apparition of a white dog with blue eyes in his room. It made me recall that when I was younger, there was a time when my mother actually anointed the entire house with oil. You know, did the whole grab holy water and some oil and anoint every doorknob in the house. I was about 3 years old at the time. And what spurred this spontaneous, I guess, anointing was I began to tell Mom and Dad, oh yeah, there's a wolf that comes to talk to me in my room at night. I just talk to the wolf and we talk about this or that or the other. And my mom thought it was strange, but I was her first child, so she thought, sure, she's got an imaginary friend, okay, whatever. Well, after a short period of time, I would come running out of my room in tears and say, I'm scared of the wolf. The wolf is scary. He's growling at me. He's telling me mean things. I'm so scared. And at that point, my mom was like, nope, and took it upon herself to bless the house. So that's just one little short detail. Like I said, I'm sure I'll call back in. I've got a myriad of tales to share with you, and maybe you can explain some of them. Maybe there's some kind of, psychology phenomenon where people see wolves. It seems like a pretty common subconscious trope, but thought I'd share and see what you think. Thanks. Keep it up.
Thanks, Chloe. Well, that's a new one on me. Typically, when we talk about wolves, it's in reference to dogmen, or werewolves, or even shapeshifters or skinwalkers. But this is the first I recall hearing about one visiting a child. If any one of you out there listening has some insight on this little mystery, or any true paranormal experiences for that matter, please give the toll-free hotline a call at 1-888-608-NIGHT. That's 1-888-608-6444. And please don't forget, I'm still looking for those museum or historical building stories. And don't forget about Hometown Legends as well. We only have 2 more episodes before our next Hometown Legends season finale, so get those calls in soon. So our next call of the evening comes to us via part of the MAU Inner Circle of Trust. If you frequent the Facebook page, you might just recognize our next submitter. So please join me in welcoming John from Minnesota to the program.
Hey Derek, it's John from Minnesota giving you a call back. It's been a little while since I've called in, but I did want to share with you and everybody one of the most, I guess, impactful things that's happened to me, like in a paranormal sense. I'm starting to get nervous even just thinking about talking about it, but something that happened a long time ago, and I'm just going to go ahead and start telling the story, and we'll just take it from there. Now, this is something that happened to me in Minnesota at the time I was living in a small town just north of Duluth, and I worked in Duluth. So I drove every day to and from Duluth to work and then back home. And I had some friends that worked with me that once in a while I'd give a ride to, and we'd ride share there and back or whatever. And I want to say this was in the fall of 1999. And it was at a time in my life where literally I maybe had read a book about UFOs and things like that, and it wasn't anything that was really ever on my mind too much. I grew up in a house that had some strange things that happened. I have a couple of stories from my youth and things like that, but nothing really like serious ever happened before this. It was one morning in the fall of '99. I remember it being the fall because I remember that there weren't leaves on the trees, that we could see through the trees to like the lake and things like that. But I had a friend that worked with me in Duluth, and I went to pick him up probably about 7:15 in the morning. It takes about a good half hour to get to our job in Duluth. And there's 2 ways that you can get to Duluth from where I was living. There's a highway and an old highway. And the old highway takes you right along the shore of Lake Superior, basically, the whole way. It's about 15, 20 miles, and it just hugs Lake Superior. And it's a beautiful view. It's a very nice drive, and especially in the fall when the leaves are changing and things like that, it's really pretty. So we had decided to go that way. I don't remember if it was because there was road construction, which is pretty common in Minnesota. That's one of our seasons, actually. It's winter and then road construction seasons. So picked up my friend at his house, and he had another guy with him that I didn't know, but it was a friend of his, and he needed a ride to Duluth too. And I had an 85 Ford Ranger. If you can picture that vehicle, it's not a super roomy vehicle, but it had the bench seating in the front, so basically 3 people could sit in it, and you probably couldn't get much more. So all 3 of us got in the truck and started driving to Duluth. And like I said, I don't know if it was road construction or we just felt like taking the scenic route or something, but something made us, I don't want to say something made us, but I felt an urge to take the scenic highway. I enjoyed it more just because it's like a scenic view and stuff, and I'm funny like that. But so anyway, we took the old highway, and we were probably about 5 minutes into our drive, and I remember very clearly that it was a clear fall day. Sun was shining, no clouds in the sky, nothing obscuring views or of any kind. We come around this corner, and just all of a sudden, my friend points out across from me towards the lake, and he's like, "What the F is that?" And literally, I looked, and I could not believe it. It was, I mean, no other way to say it, it was a UFO. And it was literally maybe at the most 400 feet off the road we were on and about the same height. It was really close, and it was just there, hovering. And I just looked at it, and I'm like, it's a UFO, almost like it wasn't a big deal or something. And then as I was looking at it, I realized, like, wow. And I'm looking at it, and it was almost traditional saucer-shaped. It had a little bit bigger dome, and it was like a weird black, like it was a dull black, like I almost want to say like kind of onyx look. It was like polished, really dull, grayish black, and it just seemed ominous. Like I looked at it and instantly got like a really bad feeling, but I was more astonished by it, and I actually started to stop because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I started stopping, and all of a sudden my friend punches me in the arm. He's like, "What are you doing? Go, go, go." And then I like stopped, and I looked at him, and then I looked at our other passenger, the guy I don't know who his name was, and he was curled up in a ball crying on the side of me. And that's when it hit me that, oh, this is a serious situation. Like, I do need to get out of here. So then I started flying, and he's just yelling, "Go, go, go. It's above us. It's above us." And I couldn't see it. I was looking around. I'm like, "Where is it?" He's like, "I swear." He's like, it's right above us. You gotta go. You gotta go. And the thing is this road, it hugs the lake. So it's not a straight road. It's really curvy. It's a lot of S curves and things like that you gotta like slow down to 30 miles an hour to get through. I mean, if you go fast enough, you're gonna crash in the side of an underpass trying to just get out of there. So I'm trying to be calm and drive kind of fast and get out of there. And I didn't know what was going on. I just remember looking over, and the kid was still crying, and like he was in hysteric. And that's what made me scared. He made me more scared than I think I really was. And then I'm like looking, I'm like, "Where is it?" And then they're like, "I don't see it anymore. It must be gone." The weird thing is during this whole thing, it was maybe only like a 2-minute episode. There was no cars going either way on that road, which was strange because people live on the road and people use it a lot, especially if there would have been road construction. But there was not another car during this whole episode until like about 10 seconds after we couldn't see it anymore. Then cars started coming from the other direction. And I thought that was so weird. It's like, how was there no other vehicles during this whole time? And the weird thing after that was we never talked about it ever. I don't even think we talked about it on the drive to work after that. I ended up still working with my friend for at least another 2 or 3 months after this, and we never talked about it ever. And I've only seen him once since I stopped working with him. And this is 20 years ago? I've seen him maybe once since that at a reunion in our hometown, and we didn't talk about it then either. I've never seen his friend again, which, I mean, I can't blame him. I kind of wouldn't want to hang out with me anymore after that either. But that's just so strange that just that kind of event made it, I don't know, we just never spoke about it. Now, the worst thing about it is it really bothered me for years. Like, I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know what I was supposed to do with that information. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of knowledge about UFOs at the time. I knew there was like all these books and all these TV shows like Unsolved Mysteries and The X-Files, things like that. So I didn't really think I thought it was something that it was, that people saw more often than they did. Was trying to figure out what to do with it, so I decided I'd start reading some books, and I just kept reading, and then I realized how unusual our event was, that it was in the daytime, clear as day. 3 people saw the exact same thing. We all had a reaction to it, and I look back at it, and I don't know what to do with the information I was given. And the problem was I couldn't talk about it in my household because it was really anti that type of thing, where the lady I was married to at the time basically said, if you see those things, you're insane and you need a psychiatrist because you're absolutely crazy. Those things don't exist. Well, they do. Absolutely, they do. I'm not saying they're aliens. I don't know what it was. It was a UFO. We saw it, and UFOs do exist. And I was having a lot of problems trying to figure out what to do with that information, like I had said. So what I had done is I really liked the books that Stanton Friedman wrote. Rest in peace. He passed away earlier this year. I was kind of sad about that. But so I actually reached out to Stanton Friedman. I wrote him a letter about my experience, and basically told him, hey, I need to talk to somebody. I don't know what to do with this, and I don't know who else to turn to or what to do. So I just wrote a letter to him, and amazingly, he wrote me back, and we corresponded a little bit. And so it was kind of neat that he took the time out to talk to me about it, and it made me feel a lot better. But yeah, I just wanted to share this story for you. I hope it helps maybe somebody else out if they've had a similar sighting. And I just want to say thank you, Derek, for this podcast, this amazing podcast, this platform for us to get these off our chests, to feel a little bit better and not have to bottle these things up. You do wonderful work. We can't thank you enough. And, just keep up the good work, sir, and we will talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And thank you for helping keep the Facebook group a fun, safe place to talk spooky. Now, let me start by saying that I can literally hear the stress in your voice as you're telling the story. It doesn't matter what this thing was, a trick of the eye, or top secret military intelligence, or even craft from another planet, solar system, dimension, or even time. Whatever this thing was, I could tell it made John nervous. And frankly, I could understand why. Well, as it turns out, John and his passengers aren't the only ones to see something strange in the skies above Lake Superior. A quick Google search will reveal a handful of images and even a few videos of others seeing something strange over Superior. And if you dig a little deeper, you find a gem like the following. Now, assuming John's sighting took place in mid-October, as his memory might suggest, that would have the sighting I'm about to share with you occurring possibly 20 years to the day of John's encounter. And if not to the day, it's certainly possible it's 20 years to the month. Either way, it feels like that should be significant. Now, without further hesitation, the following clip comes courtesy of KKCB B105 out of the city of Duluth, and features a first-hand encounter by one of the employees at the station, Ken Hayes. No relation, I don't believe. Now pay close attention to how Ken describes the craft that he also witnessed over Lake Superior. And lastly, before I hit play, I know you can't see it, but he's drawing a chevron shape, or sort of half of a diamond. Now, here is Ken's story.
Alright, so when it was coming at me, it wasn't right above me, but it was high in the sky. And when it came, it was kind of coming over the top of me, so I saw a shape that kind of looked like so. It was coming at me. You know, this is more of an angle. I'm not that great of an artist or something, but you could see that it was like a darker color and reflective, like a polished piece of coal in a way, you know. But then there was glow of lights coming up on it, and those weren't easy to see right away at the beginning because they were dim, which was really weird. You always have to be bright, but they'd be dim. And then when it turned, it did not bank. It just moved in a way that it was going to what would be the east direction. And then you could see those lights again, clearer. And at the entire time that it was going, and like I said, it was darker, and you could see reflective of the city lights off of it. It was almost like, you know, it had reflectivity to it. And as it went off, it didn't make any sound. There was never any engine noise. There was never any rotor wash. There was nothing. And it didn't look, it never appeared to be flying. It appeared to just be moving in the sky effortlessly. And that was what the most unsettling thing was. So, you know, anybody else saw anything, but and there's a lot of reports I've been seeing and looking that this isn't uncommon at all. This is a very common UFO sighting, and I saw it.
Now, if you're like me, you're more than curious about the many similarities between John and Ken's stories. So, John, do me a favor and take a look at this video and let me know if any of this stuff matches up. And thank you again for sharing the entry. I could tell it was difficult for you to do so. And now, speaking of that Facebook page, you should check out our social media pages. John, Addie, Sarah, Tony, and Warren have the Facebook rolling. And my wife Sarah helps keep us current on Twitter and Instagram. And Josh has launched a brand new Reddit page or profile, or whatever they're called over there. Search out Monsters Among Us on your favorite platform. And while you're at it, be sure to thank our amazing social media team. They do amazing work. Whoa, okay. That was a long segment. So let's do a little catering to our short attention span listeners. The following is a short, sweet, and spooky entry, and it comes to us from Corey in Big Sky Country.
Hey, this is Corey from Montana. So, as a kid, I grew up on the top of the Bull Mountains in Roundup, Montana, and we had 40 acres next to Forest Service land. And I had pretty much free reign to ride my four-wheeler around. I had a Honda four-wheeler, and I could go around and terrorize the property. And we had this upper hill plateau that we thought about building a replacement cabin on. And I was up on this plateau doing Brodies, you know, running in circles on my four-wheeler. And when the dust cleared, I stopped, and I had a helmet on with the clear plastic visor. And I just saw this Indian chief sitting on a horse staring at me. Okay, we've got, you know, a lot of Indian stuff in Montana, but we weren't near any reservations. And on top of that, we're at the top of a mountain. We were the top of a mountain, no neighbors within a mile and a half. And even still, that'd be really weird. But full headdress, you know, the chief thing, the full headdress and the buckskin clothes, and he had a staff, and the horse was normal, didn't have any war paint or anything on it. Don't remember if there was a saddle or reins. I'm not really a horse guy. But it scared the shit out of me. I am like 5, maybe 6 years old at this point, and my mom and dad are at a cabin over on the other hillside, so I was so scared I ran full tilt towards a barbed wire fence and managed to panic and stop, and then I went and turned a hard left down a mountainside where we had no four-wheeler trail to get away from this Indian that scared me so much. And I had to loop around and come back up our property and get back to our cabin, and I did. And I ran inside and I told my dad. And the point of this is my dad was a ex-Vietnam veteran, Special Forces Green Beret Special Ops. So there's not much he's scared of. And of course he had a lot of skills in hunting and tracking and killing anything that might be threatening his child. So I ran in the house scared, threw my helmet down, told him what happened. Well, he grabbed his SKS rifle and went around the backside of the property to go and look for tracks and see what the hell was on our property. And, I mean, a horse leaves deep tracks. This is summertime, so not an issue seeing tracks in the hillside. And he spent probably an hour circling our property, looking for tracks, looking where I was. He found my four-wheeler marks. He said there was nothing there, no sign of anyone or anything. And the only thing we could think of was ghost. So that's the story of my ghost Indian chief, Roundup, Montana. This is probably 1997. Love your show. I recently found it, and it makes a huge difference to people just sharing their stories. It's real, and it made me want to share mine so you can have more material. So thank you, and keep it up, and I will probably join your paid group soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Corey. Your story reminds me of a movie I used to watch a lot when I was a kid, The Last of the Dogmen. No, it wasn't about werewolves or the Beast of Bray Road. It was the story of a tribe of Native Americans that have lived, uncontacted, in a remote and secluded valley in, you guessed it, Montana. It's pretty good if you like contemporary Western adventures, or Tom Berenger. There's a link to the trailer in the show notes. If this is something that piques your interest, I highly suggest checking that out. Otherwise, it's a great story, Corey. And as someone that's also seen the ghost of a Native American, I can attest how amazing and eerie the experience is. The gentleman that I saw also had a large feathered headdress. Perhaps that's significant to Native culture in some way. I'd love to hear from our First Nations listeners on this. Any input you have would be greatly appreciated. Thanks again, Corey, for sharing that one. Now, before we dive into our last few calls, I want to remind everyone that you can get bonus content over at Patreon. And I just launched a new level where I read works by Edgar Allan Poe as a much-requested sleep aid, I suppose. I'm doing my first recording just after this episode drops, so hop on over to patreon.com/Monsters Among Us podcast for more details. And thank you so much to all the patrons that help keep the show ad-free. Now our next call is another aerial mystery. Please welcome Susan to the program.
Hey, Derek. This is Susan, and I'll just say I'm from parts unknown, although the story I'm telling you about is in regards to UFO in the Atascadero, California area. I listened to one of your podcasts recently, excuse me, and I thought I would tell you my little story. So this takes place in 1995. It is a summer evening. It is about 11:30, about 12 o'clock at night. It is a clear night with no clouds, no moon, lots of starlight. The place is in the foothills between Atascadero and Morro Bay, and about a few miles in from any paved road. The property itself butts up against 100,000 acres of cattle ranch land and Bureau of Land Management land, so there's lots and lots of open range in this area. So it was I worked till 11:15 or 11:30 every night, and it was my routine to come home every night and water all my plants and shrubs and whatnot outside. The soil is poor, and it required during the summertime daily watering. We had huge English walnut trees in the front yard, and they provided a dense and very dark cover. I always did my irrigation, as it were, watering outside without the lights on unless I had some necessary means. I just enjoyed the peace and quiet and the sounds of nature. So the only other person home was my roommate. The lights were dim in the house. There was only one room that showed any light at all, and it was very dim. Everything was quiet, and I was watering for a bit, and I don't know what got my attention, whether everything just went quiet all of a sudden or what, but I looked up, and straight across from me, now mind you, I'm probably about 100 feet up from the road on the side of a hill on a level area, and this, what I see is probably only 50 feet higher than that, and what I'm seeing is something I can't make out exactly. All I can really see is what appears to be kind of a shape with no defined line, and several running lights that were, weak and yellowish, like like a 20 or 40 watt light bulb, would be under a shade. At any rate, it made no noise, and it moved extremely slowly. My brain went initially to the blimp, because we lived under the flight path of the blimp when it traveled from San Francisco to Los Angeles or LA back to San Francisco. But that obviously has a real undeniable sound. Anybody that's listened to a blimp knows the sound, what they look like. And besides that, I figured instantly that the blimp would be too huge to be down in this little tiny valley. So I just kept watching it. Started to call for my roommate, but actually I just wanted to keep watching it to see what would happen. The way the valley is, and even at night, the air is so clear there. At night, the stars are very bright like it was that night. There's a lot of ambient light because there's nothing to spoil it from the city. We're totally tucked in a little valley. And so the valley comes to a V, just what would have been on the other side of this thing, whatever it was. And I figured I'd just wait till it got into where the sky was backdropped against the mountain and I'd be able to pick up a shape. But when it got there was nothing to see. It was almost like it was cloaked, kind of like, it was just kind of invisible. It was like, it reminded me of Wonder Woman's plane. You just see the outline, and there really wasn't even that. It kind of alluded to a shape of a hot dog bun, kind of like that, but I could not tell whether it was wide, and the length appeared to be 50, 75 feet. But the front end was never really visible to me. It's just like I was catching the backside of it. It moved so incredibly slowly. I could have walked and kept up with it. We just decided I would just keep watching it because it was headed towards the other little hills that were straight across from it. And I figured something would have to happen then. I would have to be seeing something. But actually what happened was it just disappeared into like that hill. It just disappeared. One light after another. It was almost like you could see through this object, but you couldn't see inside. It was so weird. At any rate, I never could really explain it adequately enough to repeat the story to too many people. My roommate wanted to know why I didn't wait and get him up, and I said because I was afraid it would disappear when I turned my back on it, and I just don't have any words for it. My feeling really wasn't alien. That property there was frequented by aircraft from the local military bases. We have a couple of theirs in that area, so we'd see helicopters coming in low sometimes, dropping people out, pulling them back in. They also used to send jets through there very, very low, so much I could actually see the face of the people who were flying it, okay? So that's how low to the ground they were. According to my roommate, this property had some kind of anomaly, let's put it that way, kind of Bermuda Triangle kind of anomaly. And they used to test their stuff running under the radar, and often it couldn't be seen according to what he told me. I really don't know where he got this information. So I kind of think this is probably one of the military little jobs, but if it is bizarro, and it's very effective at not being seen and being stealthy. It's just weird. I've had a lot of weird things happen. I'll call back another time with other weirds, but this is the only one and only true UFO I have ever seen. I love your program. I just turned on to it a month or so ago, and I love it a lot. Love the stories. Love how you handle it. Just the whole format, everything. You have a great day, and all the listeners keep contributing because this really keeps me up at night listening. So y'all have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan. I once ate at the Atascadero In-N-Out Burger while on a road trip up north. It seemed like a nice little town. So it's crazy to imagine that all this action can go down in such a peaceful place. And while Susan mentioned secret military testing, and that got me thinking of both John and Ken's experience from earlier in the episode. I'm wondering if what they saw was one of the same mysterious craft that seemed to be pestering Susan's property. And if whatever this thing is has some sort of cloaking capabilities, well, that certainly would explain a lot. Well, thank you again, Susan, for the submission. I'll keep my eyes open next time I'm up that way. All right, folks, it's that time of the evening. Time to wrap this installment up. And to do so, we head back to the state in which I was raised. The following is John's entry from the Buckeye State.
Hi, this is John from Ohio. I live about 45 minutes north of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And this happened, let's say, between 1988 and maybe 1990. A lot of things happened, but this one really stuck out the most. I don't know how you'd classify it. To me, I was a child at the time. It was creepy as hell. I was coon hunting with my father, like we normally do in the wintertime. I hunt a lot, and we was coon hunting at night. Let's say it's about 2 o'clock in the morning, and we see a spotlight on us. Well, this night was very clear. There was like maybe a partial moon, and a floodlight came on us in the middle of this woods we was hunting in. And he's like, what's going on? We looked up, and you could see, only I can describe is it had one light, a floodlight on us, and it looked like the helicopter blades. It was a oval-shaped thing. It had to have been a helicopter, I think. I don't know. The thing about it was a still night, and I heard nothing. And my father was like, what the hell do you want? To this, whatever this was. And the light turned off and went straight toward Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. To this day, I think it was some kind of technology that maybe the government had. I don't know. But I could tell you could hear a pin drop a mile away, and that thing made absolutely no sound. When the light hit us, it scared the living bejesus out of us. And that's one of many stories here in Ohio I've had. I might have time to give you one more. When I was younger, I'd say 1986 or 87, my mom was taking me to school early in the morning, and we lived down by the Miami River Valley, again, just north of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And we went down this one back road to get to our old school. And all I could say is something on 2 feet, every bit 8 foot or taller, walked across the road in front of us. My mom locked the brakes up, and I saw it too. It was like kind of dusk or early morning where it was still kind of hazy. All you could see was the headlights. It didn't even turn and look at us, but it was bipedal, like many of your people on your show. It looked like a giant ape. I did not see its face. It had very long arms, very muscular. Remember how thick its legs were. Just scared the crap out of me and my mom. And that happened. Kind of, this brings back the nerves to not get sidetracked. But anyway, we went back. We didn't even go to school. My mom was terrified. I went back with my father with a gun. And when we got there, you could see the footprints, the typical Bigfoot print. Again, this was in the early 80s. That's the story there. Thanks, Derek, for everything you do. I love your podcast. Keep up the good work.